required to provide an 8-factor analysis in order to document the safety, the addiction, and the medical uses of any substance that they want to schedule. But they did an interesting thing in that Federal Register notice. They said that they were going to use the emergency powers section of the Controlled Substances Act in order to schedule kratom. Now, a couple of things happen if they were successful. One is there's no public comment period. The emergency section of the CSA was designed to go after street drugs that street drug dealers would concoct on the street corner, and they would throw a bunch of stuff together and it would kill people, so they had to be able, the government had to be able to act swiftly. They had to document deaths that were associated or significant adverse events in order to get that kind of scheduling. And they didn't have to prove all of the 8 factors. They only had to prove 3, which related to addiction liability and the safety factors and whether or not it has an approved medical use. So the FDA elected to use that very narrow way. The other problem is that there's no judicial review of using that section of the Controlled Substances Act. But the standard is tough. Congress didn't let them get a free ride when they're doing it, right? So the Food and Drug Administration tells the DEA that there were 33 people who died, right? Now remember, the emergency power section is designed to interdict those events that are happening right now. Those 33 deaths spanned a period of 5 years globally. They weren't even in the United States, all of those deaths that they were alleging. So when the FDA does something like that, they are misinforming the public. They are telling a lie, and they want that lie to be repeated. And then they want other people that believe it to repeat it. And in that time period between 2012, when the FDA first put an import alert on kratom, and does anybody know why they did that? Anybody know why in 2012 the FDA jumped into the breach and said kratom is bad? 9 people died in Sweden in 2009 in a 12-month period from ingesting a kratom powder product called Kratom that was sold on the internet. Anytime that cluster of deaths in that short a period of time is attributable to a single product, it is appropriate for every public health official in the world to look at it and be concerned. It resulted in kratom being banned in a couple of European countries. It also resulted in the FDA saying, well, what can we do? They do not have the power under the Controlled Substances Act to ban any substance. So they did the next best thing. They put an import alert on it, and the reason they thought that was effective is that 95% of all kratom coming into the United States originates in Indonesia. So by slapping an import alert on, the theory that the FDA had was that will stop it, and so we aren't going to have kratom in the United States. Well, they misjudged the situation, obviously, because it grew to a population in 2016 of about 3 to 5 million people that were using kratom. Over in Southeast Asia, it has been used for centuries. Okay? It has been used for centuries without a single documented death. It has been used for centuries for purposes for which an individual is allowed to choose to use it, and that is for pain relief, for energy boost, and some were using it to get off of opioids. Okay? Now, opioids is not just a crisis in the United States, and by the way, it's a huge crisis. In 2019 to 20, there was a 30% spike in drug overdose deaths in the United States. That is astounding. In other countries, the same problem is occurring. So the abuse of drugs with overdose deaths is a major public health problem. Nobody denies that. But over in Southeast Asia, it has been used for the purpose of getting people to wean off of or stop using opioids. So wouldn't that be a good thing? Mm-hmm. The FDA doesn't think so. Not because they're concerned at all about either the health impacts or the benefits of it. It's because they do not get to control it. Because the only way they get to control it is if someone says, I want to develop a new drug. I want to file the new drug application. I want to go through the 5 to 10 year process and a $3 to $5 billion cost in order to go through the process to get an approval. If you were an innovator and you had a kratom product, and let's say you developed a synthesized alkaloid of either retrogyny or 7-hydroxynitrogyny or any of the other 30 or 40 alkaloids that are in the kratom plant, and you figured out you could develop a great product, you could spend the $3 to $5 billion, you could spend that 10 years, or 3 to 5 billion, and you could say then at the end of that process, I now have a new drug application, which means that I can make a ton of money by selling that, right? But there's no innovator in the world that's going to do that when people can go and pick the plant and get the very same effects. So there never will be a pathway to a Kratom drug, except in a very limited marketplace where you might be able to standardize the dose and prove with a specific application or use by an individual that is acutely in danger because of an opioid overdose. Maybe that fits, but that's never going to be a commercially viable product, so you're not going to have an NDA. The FDA, by the way, knows that. So they're just trying to eliminate Kratom completely from the marketplace. 2016, what happened? No public comment period, and yet 6,000 brave individuals picked up the phone and called the DEA and said, in essence, what in the hell are you doing? Why are you trying to ban this substance? It has helped me, it has benefited me, it's changed my life, it has improved the quality of my life, and it has saved my life. The DEA people answering those phone calls and responding to the emails, 6,000 of which came across their transom from August 31st to September 30th. That's the time window in which this would have become a finalized controlled substance in the United States using the emergency powers section for at least 2 years and probably longer. That's what would have happened. The DEA people at the other end of that phone call listening to those emails said, what are they talking about? We don't even know what Kratom is. We only did it because the FDA told us to do it. And so they started to ask questions. They wanted to know, well, what are you talking about? Why are these people so upset? Now, by the way, as a backdrop, 147,000 people signed the We the People petition on the White House website saying don't ban Kratom. 147,000. That's more than a lot of other very popular issues. If you go and check it, it's one of the top petition getters in the history of that website. And the FDA's answer was, we think it's a bad product. We think it's killing people. We have the evidence of 33 people that have died. By the way, 9 of those people in Sweden. Now, the FDA has an obligation to be accurate. They have an obligation to tell the truth. It is a statutory requirement that the FDA has to provide accurate, truthful information anytime they disseminate information from which they could reasonably expect that there would be a public policy decision made, like a scheduling recommendation. They are duty-bound to tell the truth. What they did not tell in their 8-factor analysis, or their 3-factor, and by the way, the 3-factor and 8-factor all require that there be a search for all of the literature that is currently available in the public marketplace. Peer-reviewed published studies, they have to search for them and they have to report them accurately. What the FDA did not tell the DEA that was in 2011, there was a peer-reviewed published article in a very reputable journal by a group of Swedish scientists that looked at those 9 deaths that occurred in that 12-month period in Sweden from Kratom. And what they found was that those deaths actually occurred because that Kratom product was adulterated with O-desmethyltramadol. O-desmethyltramadol is the chemical used in the production of the opioid tramadol. It will, in the dose that was in that particular product, kill you within minutes. So if that same dose were in your glass of orange juice or cup of coffee in the morning, you'd be dead, right? Has anybody heard the FDA squawk about an adulterated product like coffee, Tylenol, tea, orange juice, any other number of products that has killed people? Have you heard them call for the scheduling of the underlying product which was adulterated? Of course not. You don't. That's not the public health policy in America today. Yet they carve out this exclusion for this hated product that the FDA thinks needs to be controlled and therefore eliminated from access to the American people. So, at the end of the evaluation period, the DEA said, this doesn't make any sense to us. And by the way, there were 51 members of the United States House of Representatives who sent a letter to the DEA and said, don't schedule this. 26 Republicans, 25 Democrats. There were 13 members of the United States Senate. And to give you a flavor of how it spans the partisan divide, you had Orrin Hatch, then the United States Senator from Utah, arguably one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, and yet Bernie Sanders on the other side, who unquestionably is one of the most liberal members of the Senate. So this is not a partisan issue. This is a philosophical issue about whether the government should have control over the decisions that individuals make about their health and well-being when there is otherwise a safe product that they can ingest. And 3 to 5 million people at the time in 2016 claimed that they were safely ingesting Kratom and that they were using it to benefit themselves, that was improving their quality of life and in some case saving their lives. Why, in that context, would any federal agency try to get in the way? Why would any federal agency like the FDA lie about what actually happens and what the truth is? By the way, those other 33 deaths, they had one young man who had had a lifelong struggle with bipolar disorder, who had been released from a mental institution a week before he died. He died by suicide. He hung himself. When he died, they did the tox screen. He had 6 other potent drugs at toxic doses. He had also consumed a Kratom tea earlier in the day. And the FDA concluded, despite all of those dangerous substances and toxic levels in his system, that Kratom was the cause of it. Now, the obligation the FDA has is to identify the true cause of the death when they report it, from which there would be an anticipated action by the government, such as a scheduling recommendation. They have to tell the truth, and yet the FDA ignored them. And by the way, what they also did, up until the 2016 action, they had been telling state legislatures, state boards of pharmacies, state public health entities, anti-drug coalitions, that Kratom was a dangerous drug. They were telling them it was an opioid. It is not in the opioid family. It's from the coffee family. It has opioid-like effects in the mu-opioid receptor in your brain only in that it has an analgesic effect. It also helps people with mood issues and anxiety. But it does not have any addiction liability. It doesn't have that reinforcing high that comes from the ingestion of an opioid product. And most importantly, it does not travel to the respiratory system in your body. We die of opioid overdoses when you're consuming an opioid because it suppresses your respiratory system. You literally suffocate. You don't die from the drug, you die from the effects of the drug. Kratom doesn't do that. It hits the same mu-opioid receptor, and the important point here is the binding affinity to your mu-opioid receptor. By the way, there are other substances that hit the same mu-opioid receptor that do not suppress the respiratory system, just like Kratom. It would be chocolate, cheese. There have been peer-reviewed public studies about cheese, about why people like it on pizza, because it gives you a pleasurable effect that is a part of hitting that binding to the mu-opioid receptor, right? The FDA says, oh, it hits the mu-opioid receptor, ergo it is an opioid. It hits the mu-opioid receptor, ergo it's dangerous. It hits the mu-opioid receptor, ergo it is going to kill you. None of that is true. And scientists immediately challenged the FDA, told the DEA, what the FDA is saying is nonsense. It is not proven scientifically that that's the case. But the FDA never backed down on it. They never backed down when they went to the states and repeated over and over again their disinformation about Kratom, and it led 6 states to ban Kratom. These are states that they did what they thought was the right thing. They believed the FDA. Why would you not believe the FDA? They're supposed to be that trusted organization. Now, no one remembers that back in the 1990s, the FDA did the very same thing that they're doing to Kratom today to dietary supplements and vitamin products. The FDA said at that time they were killing people. And they were right, by the way. There were some poorly formulated, adulterated dietary supplement products that were killing people. No question about it. The solution is not to ban all dietary supplements. And the United States Congress saw it. Not because they're smart people, by the way. You don't have to be smart to be in the Congress. I think that everyone would agree with that. It's because on one week, 300,000 people called the United States Congress and literally shut down the congressional switchboard. They had to completely rebuild the congressional switchboard system to accommodate that volume of calls. They had never seen it before. These were dietary supplement advocates, people that took dietary supplements. They wanted to protect their right to do so. They also received 700,000 letters. This is back when emails weren't around. 700,000 letters. It blew the Congress away. And what the Congress did in 1994 is they passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which said to the FDA, you don't get to do this game where you blame dietary supplements for deaths. We're going to make the dietary supplement manufacturers prove their safety. That's all they have to do. And when they do that, they get to go on the market unless you, the FDA, can identify a good reason not to do it. Okay? The FDA hates it. They literally hate it. I sat behind FDA Commissioner Kessler when he and Senator Hatch addressed the House committee that was the Energy and Commerce Committee evaluating the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. And Senator Hatch turned to Commissioner Kessler and said, he is my friend. And he had worked for Senator Hatch before. He said, but he is dead wrong on this issue. He doesn't understand the science behind dietary supplements and their effects in boosting the immune system and having structure function claims that are real, that help people. He doesn't get it. And it infuriated Commissioner Kessler. And as they stood out in the hall, and I'm just standing right next to him, Commissioner Kessler said, I don't care if you pass it or not, meaning the Congress. He said, I'm not going to enforce it. He said, I won't enforce it because you're wrong. That was Kessler's view, right? The Congress of the United States passed, and I know this, you have to go check me, because you're going to say, that isn't possible. They passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act unanimously. Unanimously. Can anybody imagine the United States Congress voting unanimously to do anything? They did. And they restricted the FDA. If the FDA were able to today, they would repeal the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. They hate dietary supplements, they hate any natural product, and they hate kratom. So fast forward to 2016 and then beyond, the FDA continues its onslaught and its fight against kratom every day. And they have to be swatted down just like the Deshay Act did, because they're not going to come to their senses on their own. Okay? So on October 13th of 2016, the DEA did a fabulous thing. They said, we are withdrawing the Federal Register notice calling for the scheduling of kratom. First time in 82 previous scheduling recommendations that were published in the Federal Register by the DEA that it was withdrawn. It was unprecedented. Never happened before. Why? Because people stood up, they rallied, and they told the DEA how wrong the FDA was. The FDA then said the DEA said they were going to open up a public comment period from October 13th to December 1st. They told the FDA, we want you to produce a full 8-factor analysis. In other words, prove it. If you claim that kratom is killing people, if you claim that it is this awful substance, prove it with a full-blown 8-factor analysis, right? They gave until December 1st of 2016 to do that. They had a couple months. They should have been able to do it. They also opened up this public comment period where 23,232 Americans stood up and expressed their First Amendment rights, and they commented on that recommendation for scheduling. 99.1% of those people were fully in favor of keeping kratom legal on the marketplace. The rest of them, there was a very small percentage saying never do it. Most of the rest of the 0.9% were people saying, we don't know, but we should study more. They weren't saying to ban it, right? There was no outcry except from the lone wolf out in Bethesda at the FDA saying, let's ban this stuff, because they want regulatory control. That's all this is about. So, December 1st comes, all those comments are in. Jack Henningfield, who is a former NIDA scientist, for 16 years worked and produced 8-factor analysis with a focus on addiction liability of any substance that should be scheduled. He had done dozens of these 8-factor analyses. He volunteered to the American Kratom Association that he would produce pro bono an 8-factor analysis, and he did. And he submitted it to the DEA. And his evaluation was, like many, many other substances, you potentially could find a reason to schedule it, but on balance, because of the public health impacts, you should not. And he cited the fact that there were people reporting that they were able to wean off of opioids successfully, and that was enough from a public health balance, from a harm reduction measure, to not schedule kratom in the absence of any valid evidence about there being a public health harm. And he dissembled the argument about the deaths. Made the point that these are not, even if you believe all 33 of the deaths that they had advanced at that time, if you believed every one of them was attributable to kratom, that wasn't, and yet every death is of course tragic, that was not a significant number of deaths in order to justify this kind of onerous scheduling procedure. By the way, those 33 deaths were worldwide. Did I mention that earlier? 2 of them that were reported in the FDA's analysis of the 33 actually were part of a journal article that said, is metrogynine safe, right? Is kratom safe? It was a German article. They were looking at, those 2 deaths reported looked at one that had a very low level of metrogynine in the blood levels of a decedent against the highest at that time known case of metrogynine levels in another death. So they were just comparing the 2. They reported there were 2 deaths for which there was metrogynine detected in the bloodstream. That article did not say that that was the cause of the deaths. It merely said that we are analyzing 2 deaths where metrogynine was a part of the tox screen. That's all it said. And the FDA reported those as 2 deaths attributable to kratom. Now, the outcome of that study, by the way, was that even at the highest level that was known, I think it was 900 nanograms at that point of metrogynine, even at the highest level, there's no relationship between the dose to the death. That was the outcome of the study, and the FDA used it as 2 of the deaths that they claimed in the 33. This was bizarre. Nobody had seen it in the scientific community that the FDA would stretch its credibility to that level, and there's only one reason they did. They thought they could get away with it. They really did. They didn't anticipate this outcry. So the FDA regrouped. They did not produce their 8-factor analysis by the deadline set by the DEA of December 1st of 16. They did produce their 8-factor analysis on October 17th of 2017. And in it, they upped the game. They said 44 deaths. They said that there were, in fact, a specific binding affinity to the new opioid receptors, which proved that kratom was an opioid. They then were attacked by the scientific community and said that if you were to use that standard that you've set for binding affinity of metrogenine and 7-hydroxymetrogenine to the mu opioid receptors, you would reject an application from the private sector using that same standard because it's not scientifically valid. And you want to use it for a major public policy decision like this to schedule a substance and put it on the controlled substances list. That's what they said. And so, in response, Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who is the Lucifer of kratom, who got up there in a press conference in February 6th of 2018, and he declared that the FDA had now developed a new computer modeling system called PHASE. And it proved that the binding affinity of kratom to the mu opioid receptors was a reality. And guess what? We've known that since 1993. There's published articles out there. What he mistook from his analysis was that fancy computer modeling projected a binding affinity that was not happening in real life. And so it was invalid. And again, they got attacked hard by the scientific community saying, this is bizarre and bogus. And so they retreated. You've never heard the phase system being uttered by the FDA today in the context of kratom anymore. But the 44 deaths. The American Kratom Association asked for, under Freedom of Information Act, for all of the autopsy and toxicology reports of those 44 deaths. We got 43 of them. We were told that one of them was available, was truly a kratom death, but the family had imposed a HIPAA restriction, which is a privacy restriction, on the release of that data. So we got 43. We submitted those 43 to an independent forensics toxicologist who examined each one of them, and her conclusion back, it's the Babin report, came back and said, not only do none of them prove the causality of kratom as the cause of death, all of them involve polydrug use or an adulterated kratom product or an underlying health condition. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, who had endorsed and signed off on and approved the original scheduling recommendation, contacted us and said, can you send us that report? Which we did. They then asked the FDA for the same forensic autopsy reports. They got 43 of the 44. There was one that still wouldn't give up because of HIPAA restriction. By the way, perfectly understandable and legal, right? They did their same analysis that Jane Babin did. They came to the same conclusion. Adulterated kratom products, polydrug use, or underlying medical conditions. That's it. There is not a single death that can be attributed to kratom, despite what Dr. Scott Gottlieb said. Oh, and by the way, the one. Nick Wing, who was at the time a reporter for Huffington Post, was doing a completely unrelated story about something else at the FDA, came across the autopsy report of that one kratom death. It was not restricted by HIPAA. That was a lie that the FDA told him. It was publicly available. He asked for it and got it. He called me up and he said, you aren't going to believe this. He said, that one death was not a HIPAA restriction. That one death that they're claiming was a kratom-caused death was actually caused by gunshot wounds to the torso. 2 shots. The individual had been killed in a drug bust. He was in the car. He was ordered out of the car by the police, and who knows what really happened in those circumstances, but the report was he'd been ordered out. The police surmised that he reached for a gun. He resisted and then reached for a gun, and they shot him. His cause of death were 2 gunshot wounds to the torso. It's on the autopsy report. And that's the one that the FDA wouldn't release. The family later told the reporter, we didn't have any restriction. They lied. Now, why wouldn't they want the public to know that a kratom-caused death were 2 gunshot wounds to the torso? These people are bizarre. They'll go to any length in order to try to justify it. They're gaslighting us. And they do it every day. They do it every day. So, it gets worse. We tried, and the AK has tried on numerous occasions to meet with the FDA. They've refused. Okay? We did meet with the Assistant Secretary for Health staff at HHS, and that's important, by the way, because under the Controlled Substances Act, the way that a substance gets scheduled is that NIDA and HHS agree that the scheduling request is justified. They submit and develop the 8-factor analysis. It then is sent to the Assistant Secretary for Health at the Department of Health and Human Services, who independently evaluates it. And then, if he or she agrees, it is sent to the DEA for a Federal Register notice publication. That's the way the process works. So we met with the Assistant Secretary for Health. We had scientists communicate with them and provide all of the information that they needed in order to show that this 8-factor analysis wasn't valid. We didn't hear a thing. What happened was, however, the DEA, the White House, and HHS, some divisions of HHS, including the Assistant Secretary of Health and NIDA, had signed off, allegedly, on a republication of a scheduling notice. That was supposed to take place in August of 2016. How many of you knew about it? I'm sorry, 2018. How many of you knew about it? I didn't. It was completely secret. There was one guy, his name was Brian Harrison, who was the Deputy Chief of Staff at HHS, who was assigned to make sure that any regulation that was going to be imposed by the HHS, any division of HHS, had to be evaluated. Remember, the Trump administration had a rule that said for every regulation we put in, we have to release 2, right? And so he was looking at it through that prism. He didn't even know what Kratom was. And he sees this call that's going to be held by, it's called an interagency call, where they were going to polish the press release. They were about to schedule Kratom. So he called the FDA and said, "What's Kratom? You're going to do a scheduling notice. I want to know what it is." And they told him what he characterized as sort of a blow-off conversation. So he Googled it. We know what that can produce, right? And he had more questions and answers. He called up the Assistant Secretary for Health and said, his name was Dr. Brett Chua. He said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, I don't know anything about Kratom, but from what I've heard, we probably should schedule it." And Brian said, "Well, would you do me a favor? Would you look into it? Because I don't understand a lot of this scientific stuff that's being discussed here." And Dr. Chua said, "Okay, as a favor to you, I will do that." So Dr. Chua spent 2 weeks. And at the end of that 2 weeks, he called Brian Harrison and said, "The FDA is wrong. They're wrong in the science. Emerging science now shows that Kratom does have potential health benefits that we ought not suppress. The science doesn't justify what they're claiming." He said, "I just think they're wrong." And so on August the 16th of 2018, Brett Chua sent an email with the letter to the DEA saying, "We are formally rescinding the DEA's recommendation, the recommendation from HHS to schedule Kratom." It hadn't been published yet. But once it's withdrawn by the Assistant Secretary for Health, it is no longer actionable by the DEA. Scott Gottlieb, by all reports, went crazy. He screamed at the White House. He screamed to the DEA. He screamed to the Secretary of HHS. His demand was that they rescind the delegated scheduling authority recommendation from the Assistant Secretary for Health. Gottlieb complained on a Twitter that one man stood in the way of blocking Kratom from being scheduled. One man. That was Dr. Chua. And actually it was 2, because it was Brian Harrison that did the same thing. Those 2 courageous individuals stopped a travesty from occurring. Then COVID hit, and it lost its steam, because there was an effort to try to get Kratom scheduled even then, and of course we all know that Dr. Gottlieb left the FDA. You would think that that would have lessened the temperature, the pressure. It has not. The FDA has continued its onslaught. By the way, when the rescission letter was sent, one of the staffers in the meeting said, "Should we inform the American Kratom Association that we're rescinding the recommendation?" And the FDA said, "No. We are going to invoke the ongoing regulatory review exemption under the Freedom of Information Act. We don't want them to know that you've done that." This is the agency that is tasked to give accurate information, to tell the truth to the American public, and they tell another lie. They let another lie perpetuate itself, because we all believed that Kratom was not going to be scheduled, right? It was on the brink of it, and they didn't want to disclose that the actual recommendation had been rescinded. So where are we today? Today, we know that the FDA continues its onslaught to try to get Kratom scheduled. The U.S. Congress is standing up to them. There is report language that's in the HHS House Appropriations Committee, championed by Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, which says that the FDA can't be scheduling this and that we ought to put $3 million more into research in addition to the $500,000 was already allocated for human clinical trials to show the benefits of Kratom, particularly in those areas where opioid overdose deaths are occurring. The National Institute on Drug Abuse is going full throttle on new studies because you've already seen them. Dr. McCurdy's studies are showing that there's no significant addiction liability and that there are potential benefits. The Johns Hopkins University peer-reviewed published article says of those adult Kratom users using it to wean off of opioids, 87% reported a reduction in their withdrawal symptoms. That's why we can't get off of them, is the withdrawal symptoms that occur, and they're saying that Kratom helped them, and 35% reported that they were opioid-free within a year by using Kratom. Those numbers are staggering. And it validates what Assistant Secretary of Health Jawaz said in his letter, is that to ban Kratom would put at risk millions of Kratom users who would be forced back into using dangerous opioids in order to manage acute chronic pain. How can we, as a country dedicated to protecting its citizenry, get into a position where we let this renegade agency like HHS decide to expand their regulatory authority to worship at the holy grail of more authority, more control, and more power over the American people? Well, what's happened? Since that 3 to 5 million the Kratom users in 2016, it's expanded to more than 15 million today. Why? In a perverse outcome, because the FDA drew so much attention to it. People started to educate themselves, look at it, and see that people were actually using it to benefit their health and well-being, saving their lives. And yet today, the FDA continues their onslaught. It's worse, and I got to give you the bad news. Tomorrow, you will have a Federal Register notice that the FDA is going to put on the website, which indicates that they are going to respond to a recommendation by the World Health Organization that will essentially call for the international scheduling of Kratom, along with some synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists, some novel synthetic opioids, some cathinones and stimulants, and Kratom as an herbal drug is on that list along with Finabit. They are going to try now to use the international scheduling process to do what they cannot do in the United States. And the reason they cannot do that is that the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which is required to sign off on any future scheduling recommendation, will not today do so. And the FDA was told that. And the FDA knows that they can't go any further until they can convince the NIDA people to do it. And NIDA is going by what? Science. They don't have any desire for regulatory power. They're not looking to enhance their budget. They want to do science, and now they're increasing their scientific research, not decreasing it. Now, you will hear probably in the next couple weeks another thing that the FDA just announced. They're going after us internationally. We've got to be in Geneva, Switzerland on October the 11th to put our case forward to the World Health Organization about this issue because the FDA is wrong. We're going to have to be now in August the 9th, flood the FDA with comments about how they're wrong. That's the comment period we have between now and August the 9th. The FDA published an RFP for a Kratom dosing study and a human abuse potential study, and they just announced it. They put out a request for proposals, and when I saw that, I thought, hooray, they actually are going to start to look at the science. Maybe they're turning the corner here. Oh no. When you look at the RFP, what it says is they want to do the dose study, they want to do the human abuse potential study, which by the way are about a 2 to 2.5, maybe 3-year study. It will be $5 to $10 million, right? Great, except that they have a provision in there which is unprecedented, which says that they alone will be in control of all the data. The FDA will control the design of the study, and they will control all of the data, and no contract research organization that applies to actually do the study will be allowed to publish it, they will not be allowed to disclose it, and that the FDA has complete control over it. It is unprecedented to do a study with your tax money to look at a substance like Kratom and not let the chips fall where they may. So Johns Hopkins University researchers called the FDA thinking that doesn't make any sense. They asked, are you willing to negotiate this? Because, by the way, no reputable research organization tied to an academic institution will do that. It is unethical. They will not be the producer of information that the government can then say, well, we don't like what you said, and they'll suppress it, right? So they said to the FDA, are you willing to negotiate that? And the answer was no, non-negotiable. So what in the world is the FDA doing? If we aren't looking for the truth, if we aren't letting the truth prevail, why would they do that? So I consulted a couple of friends who are former FDA officials, and their view is that two things. One is they want to be able to design the dose study so that they can make Kratom look bad. They don't want any academician outside saying, well, this is the way you ought to do it if you truly want a representative sample of the truth. They don't want that. And secondly, they want to control the output, and so if they get a bad answer that shows that Kratom is not dangerously addictive, and if they show that humans are benefiting from it, they don't want anyone to know that. Now, if they are able to design the study so that they can cook the books, cook the formula, cook the protocol, and then they get the desired outcome, you will hear about it day one, right? One of my colleagues, former high-level FDA official, says it is borderline criminal, and he's right. That's the kind of behavior that we're fighting against with the FDA today. And today, I woke up this morning to a couple of examples of what we have to fight with the FDA. We've got local drug advocacy groups who have believed the FDA, who have believed their propaganda, who have believed their disinformation, and we're fighting on a regular basis in communities across the country because the FDA knows they can't win at the federal level. So now they're talking to city councils and county boards of supervisors using these people that ought to be our champions because it's saving the lives of those who are addicted to drugs because they can wean off of those drugs and save their lives. But they've turned them against us. I spoke in Collins, Mississippi, which is about an hour and a half drive from Jackson, Mississippi, where I fly into, to a city council that had heard the propaganda from a drug advocacy group that had told them how bad Kratom was, that it was a drug. They repeated the FDA talking points. And I had to describe to them what had happened. One of those town aldermen said to me afterwards, he said, and this is a technical term, and I apologize to those who might be offended with legal and technical terms, he said, what we were told was bullshit. And he's right. They were. But that's what the FDA is peddling today because they want this expanded power in what they're doing. So the threat is real. We saw something that almost happened that we knew nothing about and they kept secret for over 2.5 years. When the rescission letter was sent, you need to read that rescission letter. It is damning to the FDA. You have NIDA fighting against them right now. You have U.S. Congress fighting against them right now. You have the science fighting against them right now. You have the truth fighting against them right now, and they are unbowed. They continue their battle. And they're now going to go to the WHO, the World Health Organization, and to the UN Narcotics Commission. And they're going to try to fight the battle there. Well, guess what? We're going to be there too. And we're going to fight this battle toe-to-toe with them because the truth should be what guides this. Science should be the basis for any of these decisions. And the health and welfare of the people of this globe ought to be the most important thing, not the pernicious power grab by a group of regulators who think that their cause in life is to expand their power over the decisions that people in the United States make about their health and well-being. That's the bottom line. That's why I welcome this opportunity to talk about how the FDA is gaslighting the American people. They do it every day, and they're going to continue to do it until we call back and say, no, no, not true. And that fight, by the way, is working, but it's like whack-a-mole. We have to fight it every day. So I welcome this opportunity. Thank you to the HQ team. Thank you, appreciate very much all of you being here this morning.